Hello and welcome to this episode of the Lexby webinar series, your go-to resource for expert insights into eDiscovery, generative AI, and digital forensics. I'm Jeff Fugit, Chief Revenue Officer here at Lexby, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's topic is a timely and transformative one, the current generative AI landscape in eDiscovery, and best practices putting this technology to use in your cases. Over the past couple of years, generative AI has gone from a curiosity to a mission-critical tool in legal tech. Whether it's automating responsiveness review, summarizing medical records and depositions, drafting chronologies, or even defining obscure acronyms buried in case files, GenAI is redefining what's possible in eDiscovery. But while enterprise legal teams are charging ahead, many law firms are still playing catch-up. We're here to change that. We'll unpack real-world use cases, explore where the technology is heading, and give you the playbook to put GenAI to work ethically, securely, and effectively on your own matters. Before we get started, we've got a few housekeeping notes. Our webinars happen monthly and cover top-of-mind topics across eDiscovery, AI, and digital forensics. If you have any technical issues during the broadcast, email us at webinars@lexby.com. Our team is standing by and we'll address those right away. Recordings, slide decks, and podcast versions of this session will be available shortly at lexby.com and on our YouTube channel. To get notified about future sessions, drop us a line at webinars@lexby.com or follow us on LinkedIn. Also, if you have questions throughout the session, type them into the Q&A panel on the GoToWebinar console, and we'll tackle as many of those as we can at the end of the session. At Lexby, we've been helping legal teams manage and win document-intensive cases for more than 18 years, and we're proud to offer the most advanced deployment of GenAI in an eDiscovery platform, including Lexby Pilot for immediate insights into your matters, Lexby Autopilot for automated GenAI review of responsiveness and privilege, and Lexby Copilot, your on-demand assistant for case analysis and review. And Lexby Copilot's bundled into every Lexby hosting plan at no additional cost. We also have lightning-fast processing with over 10,000 servers processing more than 1 million documents an hour. Just last month, we had one client upload 1.6 terabytes of PSTs, and they were able to review those documents the same day. We have top-rated user experience. We're known as the easiest eDiscovery platform to use with the fastest return on investment. And we operate a state-of-the-art digital forensic lab staffed with Cellebrite and Magnet Axiom certified experts capable of both targeted and full forensic collections. If you'd like a demo or complimentary forensic consultation, email us at any time at sales@lexby.com. We're honored to have a true industry thought leader with us today, Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today. Doug's been chronicling and shaping the evolution of eDiscovery for years, and his insights into GenAI adoption, risks, and use cases are very insightful. But before we turn it over to Doug, we'd love to get your input on a couple of quick polling questions. And our first polling question is, are you currently using GenAI in eDiscovery? And while you're answering that, I'd like to thank you for participating in our polling questions today. All right, and our next polling question, are your corporate clients using GenAI? All right, I'll go ahead and close that poll. All right, and now Doug, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome everybody to the Lexby webinar, the current generative AI landscape in eDiscovery. I'm excited to be presenting this here today, really a topic that literally everyone in eDiscovery today is talking about. So a little bit about me before we get started. I've been managing litigation support and eDiscovery projects for over 30 years in the industry, so I've stayed up on eDiscovery trends and best practices. Additionally, I've been publishing a daily blog for close to 15 years now, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. Seriously, though, writing daily has also forced me to stay current with eDiscovery trends in that perspective as well, including the one we're here to discuss today about generative AI. And of course, shameless plug warning, you can stay up with these trends by reading or subscribing to eDiscoveryToday.com yourself. And subscribing will also get you free access to any reports published by eDiscovery Today, including the annual State of the Industry report, which I'll be highlighting during parts of this presentation. So before we begin, I always remind people that any ideas expressed by me here today are my own, not those of my organization, clients, or partners. Also, please don't consider anything I'm saying legal advice. It's eDiscovery best practices advice and information on trends and best practices in the industry. And here's what we'll be covering today. We'll start by discussing the impact of generative AI on eDiscovery that the industry expects as soon as this year. Then we'll discuss the technology itself, what it actually does, how it can get off track, and why that happens. Next, we'll take a look at generative AI features in eDiscovery, how the use cases for the technology span well beyond just using it to automate document review. And we'll look at some examples illustrated by the Lexby platform to illustrate some of those features and use cases. After that, we'll discuss some potential challenges and roadblocks to using generative AI and how to overcome those challenges and roadblocks in your own use. Then we'll get into a topic that many people have been talking about, whether GenAI will actually eventually replace the use of technology-assisted review, also known as predictive coding, or will it complement the use of TAR and discovery? And I think we've got people who have opinions on both sides of that question, so we'll get into that a bit. After that, we'll also discuss something we all care about, which is how much of the use of GenAI costs and how to achieve return on that GenAI investment. Finally, we'll discuss some best practices for getting started with GenAI in your projects that will maximize the potential for success in them. So let's get started by talking about what the legal industry thinks the expected impact of generative AI will be on eDiscovery. Every year, as I mentioned at the outset, eDiscovery Today publishes a State of the Industry report regarding eDiscovery trends, and for the last 2 years, we've asked questions related to generative AI. This year's survey had 551 respondents to the survey, so it was a pretty broad distribution of participants. This year, we asked this particular question, we asked both years. And that question is, what do you believe will be the impact of large language model and generative AI technologies on eDiscovery solution offerings and workflows in 2025? So in this year's survey, more than a quarter of 551 survey respondents, 26% to be exact, said they expect LLMs and generative AI to have a transformative effect this year. Well, that's pretty impressive, and it's 2.1% higher than last year's survey results. And when you add the people who said the technology will be at least used to create new eDiscovery workflows this year, that means more than 4 in 5 respondents, 81.7% to be exact, expect it to at least create new workflows in 2025. So it's clear that the industry is very gung-ho about generative AI. Another component of the State of the Industry report is thought leader observations on the same trends. And as you can see, Jeff was one of the thought leaders participating in this year's report. And you can see a portion of his observations regarding the expected impact of generative AI. And Jeff specifically talks about experiencing firsthand how GenAI is transforming eDiscovery by doing things like improving document review efficiency, enhancing early case assessment, and automating privilege and relevance determination. These are several different use cases he mentions in his comment, which illustrates just how versatile generative AI can be when applied to a discipline like eDiscovery. Of course, just because the industry's gung-ho about generative AI doesn't mean they're using it in all their cases just yet. This is another question we asked on this year's survey, and this one was for the first time. What percentage of your cases utilize LLM and generative AI technologies for any use cases, such as document review, document summaries, early case assessment, depot prep, or anything else? Here, only 12.3% of respondents said they use LLMs or GenAI technologies in all or most of their cases, while a whopping 64% of respondents said they use LLMs, Gen AI technologies, in very few or none of their cases. So we've got a ways to go before generative AI is widely adopted for use in actual cases that involve eDiscovery workflows. And honestly, that's not surprising. It's still fairly new, and people, despite the tremendous promise it has, it typically takes time for people to change their workflows to incorporate new technology. I should note that at ILTACon last year, the annual conference run by ILTA, I predicted that the percentage of respondents that said they use generative AI in all or most of their cases in next year's survey will be greater than 50%. As I feel there's so many use cases to which generative AI can be applied, that it makes sense that many legal teams will be using Gen AI for something. So we'll see if I'm right when next year's report comes out. In the meantime, you all could help me out a lot by using Gen AI a lot more and making me look good. So I would appreciate that. I should back up here. Sorry. The question we asked thought leaders for this trend was, what do you consider to be the current barriers to adoption for LLM and generative AI technologies in eDiscovery? Gene Albert, CEO of Lexby, responded to this question, and here's part of his answer, which is all I could show for space considerations. So I should mention that Gene identified the primary barrier to lawyers using generative AI as the tendency for the technology to hallucinate, which is a bad thing for a group of people who tend to be very risk averse. But Gene identifies several ways to mitigate that risk, including things like precise prompt engineering, effective use of context windows or retrieval augmented generation, RAG databases, grounding responses with citations, and maintaining responsibility for the final output. So that's great advice to those looking to use Gen AI in their eDiscovery workflows. It's not as staple as the easy button, but it can be used effectively when best practices are applied. I mentioned hallucinations, so before we go any further, let's define some terms for those who may not be fully aware of them. And let's start with a term that's often misunderstood, AI, or artificial intelligence. Here's one definition of AI. AI refers to the simulation of human intelligence in machines, enabling them to perform tasks that typically require human cognition. This encompasses abilities such as learning, reasoning, problem solving, perception, and language understanding. Through algorithms and computational models, AI systems can process vast amounts of data, adapt to new inputs, and execute tasks autonomously or augment human capabilities. Well, that's a pretty intense definition. So how about we try this one? AI is like a really smart robot in a computer. This robot can learn, think, and make decisions just like humans, but it does so by following instructions given by people. It's like having a super helper in your computer that can play games, answer questions, draw pictures, or help you with your homework. It learns from lots of information to get better at what it does, just as you learn more from reading books or practicing something new. Well, that's a lot simpler, right? Well, I should point out that both of these definitions were generated by ChatGPT, generative AI. As you can see there, the prompt for both requested a one-paragraph summarized definition of AI, but the second one asked for one that an 8-year-old can understand. Both of these are engineered prompts, where the second one uses what's known as an audience persona to customize the response. When Gene mentioned precise prompt engineering in the previous slide, that's an example of just how a precise prompt can yield a specific response that may be more tailored to what you want. That's a key concept to keep in mind when it comes to getting the most out of generative AI models for eDiscovery. Prompt specificity is key to success. So here's a few other terms you need to know. Except for large language model, I didn't find most of them here, but you can certainly look them up on your own. In fact, you can even ask ChatGPT or some other AI model to define them for you. Speaking of ChatGPT, it might be worth asking the question, which of these categories does it fall into? If you said all of them, you'd be correct. ChatGPT is obviously a generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT, and I think most of you know that it's generative AI as well. It's also a large language model that uses deep learning, natural language processing, and neural networks. It's important to know all these terms because you'll hear them discussed when related to ChatGPT and other large language generative AI models. Of course, you're probably aware that these models don't always get the answer right, and when they provide a response that's incorrect or even doesn't make sense, that's known as a hallucination. So why do hallucinations happen? Because LLMs don't actually know anything. They're really simply predict the appropriate text to return in a response based on their training. So when the training doesn't adequately cover a question being asked, the model will provide a response that thinks it's correct, and it may lead the user to believe it's correct as well, as we've seen in numerous examples of lawyers submitting court filings with fake case citations hallucinated by a generative AI model. Those lawyers failed to validate the information being provided by the model, and we're now seeing lawyers being sanctioned for this lack of review and validation of the information that goes into their filings. They still have a duty to do so and are responsible for what goes in the filings. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't use GenAI, but it's important to remember that you need to verify the content the model provides in its response, whether you're using it to provide content for a case filing or locating key information within a document collection for eDiscovery. So here's an obvious example of a hallucination created by a generative AI model that I covered in a blog post last week. In this case, it's Google Gemini that said Lady Gaga is 2 days older than Ariana Grande, even though it makes it clear that she's really more than 7 years older than Ariana. So when you see a result like this, it kind of seems as though generative AI is making up information that's nonsensical. Because certainly you can look at that and tell that that's not 2 days difference. However, when I decided to try to perform that search in Google, I found this article in Glamour magazine from a few years ago, where Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande were practicing for a performance and clowning around a bit. And at one point, Ariana Grande says to Lady Gaga, "Oh my God, you're 2 days older than me." So Google Gemini didn't just pull that information out of thin air. There's an actual source that led Gemini to the conclusion that Lady Gaga is 2 days older than Ariana Grande. May not be a very good source, but it is a source that's out there. Let's face it, Gen AI models aren't necessarily good at math, and they can't necessarily tell you how reliable a source is, but this example shows that Gen AI models are trained on lots of data, some of it good, some of it not so good. So if that gives you pause when considering using generative AI for eDiscovery, that's understandable. But it's important to note that general models are often more likely to hallucinate as they are trained on a wide variety of data throughout the world. And of course, some of that data is conflicting. On the flip side, typically AI models within an eDiscovery platform are trained on a much more targeted set of data, which is specific to the case at hand. So as a result, AI models applied to eDiscovery use cases may hallucinate less because the training is more targeted. But of course, having said that, they can still hallucinate. So you need to test and validate the results from Gen AI models in eDiscovery, just like you would for any other type of technology or approach being utilized, like keyword search and manual review, or predictive coding. It's important to remember that no approach is perfect, so they all must be tested and validated, and that includes generative AI. So now let's talk about how generative AI is being applied in eDiscovery. This is the result of another new question that we asked in this year's State of the Industry report, where we asked, to which eDiscovery and litigation use cases do you or your organization apply LLM and generative AI technologies today? As you can see here, more than 30% of respondents said they apply LLMs and Gen AI to 7 different eDiscovery use cases. That includes the obvious choices like document review and document summarization, but it also includes use cases like identification of personally identifiable information and privileged information. It includes things like development of case strategy and early case assessment, translation of documents, creating timelines of key events, which is always important in litigation, and deposition prep and creating summaries of depositions. And then you see a few others that are not that far off the 30% mark. One example is identification of image contents. So, while people aren't necessarily applying these use cases in a high percentage of actual litigations or investigations just yet, they are using them, and they're getting comfortable with applying generative AI to several different eDiscovery use cases. So it's clear that generative AI technology is not just for document review. Still, when asked which use case for LLM generative AI technologies do you think has the most upside potential to streamline eDiscovery processes in 2025, Jeff identified the use of LLMs for automated document classification and privilege review as the technologies that hold the most transformative potential for 2025, as you can see there at the bottom of the slide. And I think a lot of people agree with that. And we've been seeing some amazing accuracy numbers for Gen AI when applied to use cases like this. So the next few slides will illustrate specific Gen AI use cases using Lexi's Gen AI capabilities and solutions. The screen on this page illustrates using Lexi Pilot to start developing case strategy and a case narrative, showing a series of development issues associated with the Florida spaceport that have been identified by the generative AI engine based on a review of the documents loaded to the case. Without the ability to leverage Gen AI, you would have to conduct various searches, review the documents, and build this list of issues on your own. But in this case, Gen AI has really done it for you. So this is really an example of how Gen AI can really shine and really potentially save hours and hours of work that would be needed to assess the issues associated with the case to develop your case strategy. I also want to point out on this screen to take note of the AI engine referenced in the upper right-hand corner of the screen as we move to the next slide. So here's why I told you to take note of the AI engine. If you see the AI engine at the top right of the screen, this time it shows OpenAI as the model being used, whereas before it showed Amazon Bedrock. So one of the things that's worth noting here is that you're not necessarily limited to just a single AI model when you're using generative AI for eDiscovery. You can apply different models depending on your case needs. This screen shows another example of how Gen AI can save considerable time using Lexi Copilot this time. In this case, summarizing medical records and providing them in chronological order with the date, provider, purpose of the visit, diagnosed conditions, treatment summary, prescribed medications, and links to supporting documents. Gathering this information would normally take a lot of hours, but the AI model pulls it together for you. And links to supporting documents help you to confirm the information that's captured and source the evidence in legal proceedings. All right, here's another example, a different example, where the AI model was prompted to not only retrieve financial records using Lexi Copilot, but also respond with the results in a delimited format to facilitate loading the results into an Excel workbook with the date, description, amount, and transaction time. It may not be greatly intuitive in the delimited format as shown here, but when you load that data into Excel as a delimited format file, you get an Excel table of transactions that gives you a head start of analyzing financial records. So this is another example of how Gen AI not only retrieves important information related to your case, but does so in a manner that enables you to run with the information gathered to prepare exhibits that support your case. Here's another example of a use case that I referenced in slide 15 a few slides ago, deposition prep. Here you see the prompt, generate a line of questioning for use during the deposition of a plaintiff to establish the plaintiff's medical history with regard to pain management. Place the generated questions in a numbered list with one question per line. That's a pretty specific prompt. And the end result in this example is a list of 10 questions that can serve as a starting point for preparing for your deposition of a plaintiff in a case involving medical claims. Even if there's only one or two questions you decide to use in the actual deposition, this capability adds value to your case. And you can always ask the model for additional questions for more ideas on what to ask, or modify your prompt and request information in a different way. And that's one of the great things about generative AI capabilities, and why you need to consider applying it for a variety of different use cases, not just for document review, as it can really enhance your discovery and litigation preparation throughout the life cycle of the case. I mean, let's face it, the other side may already be using it, so why wouldn't you be as well? Some of you probably work on very similar cases again and again, like medical claims or fraud claims, employment disputes, and so forth, and you probably have developed certain tasks and workflows associated with managing those cases. So it may be important to not only keep track of the GenAI prompts that you've used for the current case, but also to be able to reuse those prompts either as is or with customization in future cases, or share those prompts with your colleagues who are also managing similar cases. So the ability to do things like develop a library of reusable prompts can streamline your management of those future cases, enabling you to avoid reinventing the wheel with each case. So I'm 7 slides in, and this is the first time I'm actually talking about leveraging GenAI for document review. And this shows just how many other use cases really there is for generative AI besides document review. What I'm focused on this slide, though, is how you can track the results of your GenAI document review using a dashboard like the one you see here for Lexby Autopilot, combining the best of analytics and generative AI. Dashboards like this can be useful to defend your review approach using generative AI, which you'll almost certainly have to do at some point, and illustrate things like the variations between actual responsive and non-responsive documents versus those predicted by the AI model, the confidence level of the AI predictions for each set, precision and recall rates for the AI model, and a table that shows false positives and false negatives for AI predictions. One of the key themes that keeps coming up regarding generative AI is how highly inaccurate it continues to be in test after test. And dashboards like this help you demonstrate that high degree of accuracy. And this final dashboard screen isn't necessarily AI specific, but it also shows how important analytics are in managing your case. So if you think of the previous screen and how the use of GenAI automated the population of many of the numbers you saw on that screen, and how those numbers automatically flow to your overall analytics for the case, it becomes clear how GenAI not only streamlines the process of understanding your document collection, but also streamlines your management of the case itself. So now let's talk about some of the challenges and roadblocks you will face in dealing with generative AI, and how to address those challenges and roadblocks. So the first one, which we touched on a couple of times, and certainly with the hallucinations example, is trust in the models. Certainly some people have concerns about accuracy and the model's tendency to hallucinate. So it's important to keep in mind that you've got to address this as a challenge, and you've got to overcome this as a potential roadblock with the people who might be using generative AI technology. And of course, one of the key things there is you have to rely on best practices, on testing and validation of the results to be able to establish that trust in the models and be able to either show that the models did produce correct results, or if there are inaccuracies, then to be able to identify and maybe go back iteratively in prompting the models in a different way to get the results you are looking for. The next challenge that people have brought up is data security and privacy. One of the things about these models is there's concerns about client data being retrieved in other contexts, or the client data being used to train the models overall. So it's important to be aware of that, and also be asking your eDiscovery provider with GenAI capabilities is how do they handle and how do they manage that client data? I think several of them are basically taking steps to ensure that client data isn't really training the model overall and being very protective of that. And you want to basically make sure you understand how the provider is protecting your data that you're working with your clients on cases. Of course, one of the big things is fear of change, and and the fear of change is often driven by a lack of expertise. People don't fully understand how these models work, and they don't fully understand how to optimize their use in terms of the features and best practices for engineering prompts and things of that nature. So one of the things that's important here is to provide training, is to basically provide the ability to kind of walk through scenarios where people can visualize how these capabilities can be used. And then, of course, you also want to select a platform that's very intuitive, that you're able to figure a lot of things out on your own. And I think one of the things we've seen with generative AI that's different from any other technology I've ever seen used in eDiscovery or in legal technology is that legal professionals seem to be very eager to kick the tires. So take advantage of that to overcome, hopefully, their lack of expertise and get them feeling more comfortable about the technology in general. The next one is one that we've seen for years with technology-assisted review. Is the concerns that that parties will be expecting transparency, a level of transparency when you use GenAI, just as they have been arguing over that with technology-assisted review predictive coding. So certainly one of the things you've got to do is be prepared to have an approach that you can defend. Full documentation is always important, no matter what approach you use to eDiscovery and document review. And it's important to keep in mind that you've got to have the ability to defend and provide transparent information into your approach if need be, which honestly you should have to do for any approach regardless. The keyword search and manual review never seem to require as much transparency, but they can go just as wrong as generative AI approaches can. One of the things that I'll mention here, of course, though, is that document review, again, is just one use case for generative AI. There are a lot of other use cases where there isn't a need to defend and be transparent. If you are using the technology for depot prep or for case strategy, none of that is information you have to share with the other side, and it still provides benefits. So keep in mind that there are plenty of use cases of GenAI where defensibility and transparency don't really apply. Another thing that people have expressed concern about is environmental footprint. If you've been reading some of the stories, these GenAI models use a lot of resources. And I think that's one of the things that will have to be addressed by the model providers and the industry as a whole, is how to do this more efficiently within environmental considerations. Not something you can necessarily address here, but it's important to keep aware of just kind of what is going on out there. And one of the things I have a feeling we will see is all the model providers will have to figure out some more efficient ways to provide models that continue to improve over time. And then, of course, the last one that people point out is cost. There's concerns and there's confusion about what it'll cost to use the GenAI capabilities within the eDiscovery platforms, and we'll get to cost here in a moment. But certainly, you obviously want to know what the costs will be and how those costs will be applied. So it's important to kind of make sure you understand what the costs are, and then you'll also need to kind of understand that in relation to the benefits, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And it's also important to shop around because different providers have different cost models, and they can be doing anything from charging for the use of GenAI on a per token basis to charging based on the size of your collection. to baking it into the platform. So it's important to be aware of those different options and shop around. Here's a question that a lot of people are asking in the industry. Will generative AI replace or complement a technology-assisted review / predictive coding? So this is a question we asked in the State of the Industry report this year to our thought leaders, and we had people on both sides of the fence. Here's a few examples of the folks who said, no, it won't replace it. My colleague, Judge Andrew Peck, who I do a monthly case law webinar with, and who is the judge who approved the use of TAR in litigation with the DeSilva Moore ruling over 13 years ago, said, hey, TAR hasn't come close to replacing keywords, so maybe AI will increase the use of TAR because conservative lawyers tend to ignore the most current technology. Pretty interesting thinking there, but I can see where he's coming from there. Certainly, Stephanie Clerkin of Current Generative said, hey, it won't replace it entirely, just like TAR didn't completely replace linear review. But so she doesn't think it will fully replace it. Mike Quartararo of ACEDS also says he thinks it won't replace it, but they do complement each other, which is what some people have said, is that really they can work complementary to each other, and I think that's certainly true in cases. So he feels like there will always be a place for TAR. And Judge Xavier Rodriguez has also talked about uncertainty, and TAR tools should survive for the time being at least. Now, while there's plenty of people who say no, it won't replace TAR, there's plenty of people who say it will replace TAR. Matt Mann from Level Legal talks about, yes, it's going to replace most predictive coding technologies, may not be a one-size-fits-all to support review and production efforts, and there may be some isolated cases, but certainly I think he expects GenAI to be supplant predictive coding technologies in most instances. Robert Keeling of Redgrave LLP also indicated that he expects it to eventually replace TAR. And Mary Mack, a CEO of EDRM, says it's absolutely an improvement over predictive coding. And even though it's not totally designed and tested for eDiscovery, which I think is changing rapidly, because this was a few months ago when she provided that quote, the early results from many longstanding community leaders point to a promising future, which I couldn't agree more. And then finally, Michael Sarich, a FOIA director at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, said yes, primarily due to speed and cost factors. So what do I think? I think that there's going to be a little bit of, it depends. There will certainly be, I think, some people who are already using predictive coding who will continue to do so in some form or fashion. And they may ultimately find that generative AI supplants that in certain instances, or maybe works alongside predictive coding in certain instances. So I think for those folks, it may not necessarily totally replace the use of predictive coding technologies. However, I think there's a large percentage of the legal community that really never has adopted predictive coding, and generative AI has a considerable promise to be the technology they wind up adopting in place of predictive coding. One of the things that differentiates GenAI is the information it provides in classifying documents, where it actually gives you a confidence level and a description that identifies why it classified the document the way it did, which is a lot more transparent than the predictive coding approaches, where you've gotten a ranking of documents and classifications, but not really any explanations. So I think it will be very interesting to see, I think, how much of the industry does adopt generative AI compared to the way they've adopted TAR, especially given that, unlike predictive coding, many lawyers out there are using generative AI chat tools like ChatGPT and other AI models So I think they're developing a comfort level that they never did develop with predictive coding. So let's talk about the elephant in the room here for a moment. How much does it cost to use AI in eDiscovery, and whether it provides a sufficient enough return on investment to make using it worthwhile? So on this slide here, you see three different pricing approaches that in my discussions with eDiscovery solution providers that have generative AI capabilities tend to be the most common approaches used to price the use of the technology. The first two approaches, per document and per gigabyte, are aligned with how other services have been priced in eDiscovery. So I think people are used to them, and they're also the most predictable from a customer standpoint. If you know how many documents you have or how large your collection is in gigabytes, you can at least somewhat estimate your cost for using generative AI in theory. However, these pricing approaches may not match up with the provider's ability to make money because they're obviously having to pay for the use of Gen AI capabilities from the model providers. So, whether it matches up with their ability to make money or at least cover the costs associated with generative AI is a question. As a result, there's a third option I've seen, which is that some have at least looked at pricing the services by token of the AI model, which is typically priced by the AI model providers to eDiscovery providers. So you might then have a more direct correlation of it costs us this, we charge this, and that's how eDiscovery providers can make their money. Below that, you see on this slide a calculation for ROI that's important to consider. And it's important to consider because the ROI is not simply savings over costs, but you have to consider the benefits that are gained by the use of the technology as well. And that's things like strategic information gathered or deadlines met. So measuring the ROI has to consider more than the bottom line numbers, but it has to consider the overall benefits that the technology provides. And of course, again, I should note that when it comes to the cost considerations here, you've got pricing models, but then you also have, I think in cases, it's potential that the Gen AI capabilities could be baked in to the overall cost of the product. So it's important to shop around. So how do you justify use the cost of using Gen AI in eDiscovery? Here's some of the things you should take a look at. The first thing is the cost savings on when you compare to manual review. Certainly, one of the things you can certainly expect is that AI can reduce document review hours, and document review is still the most expensive phase in eDiscovery. So anytime you can reduce document review hours, that can be a significant savings that, depending on the cost of the technology, could certainly make a big difference. So it's important to compare the AI-assisted review costs versus the human-only review costs to really get a sense of what that's going to be. Another consideration is the reduction in data volume. AI is being applied to things like filtering and deduplication and what have you. You can you can really look at the data in lots of different ways, and you can maybe more quickly cull down the data set using some AI capabilities and really get to the most important parts of your data set that are critical to your case. So if you're lowering the total volume, you could be reducing fees related, ranging from potentially, depending on when you do it, hosting or processing, or certainly legal fees, because your legal team is not having to work with as much data. One that can't be understated, or can't be overstated, I should say, is speed and efficiency gains. Because Gen AI is fast. You're getting faster document classification, faster identification of privileged information in documents, faster identification of personally identifiable information, PII, in documents. So those speed and efficiency gains, they can mean everything from case insights earlier in the case and improving legal strategy to being better equipped to meet deadlines, court deadlines in your case. So Lawyers, certainly one of the things they're driven by is meeting deadlines, and anything that can speed things up has to be considered from that standpoint. The next thing I would talk about is improved accuracy and reduced risk. Certainly, one of the things that we're hearing is some amazing accuracy numbers from generative AI when it comes to classifying documents. So it's that's one of the things I think you have to consider is the accuracy levels you're getting, and you have to obviously test and validate your results to confirm those accuracy levels. But anytime you can be more accurate with review and reduce the risk of missing key documents or overproducing either irrelevant documents or maybe documents with sensitive or privileged information on it, that's a good thing. Scalability and adaptability is certainly another aspect to it, because AI tools are helping organizations handle larger and more complex data sets and keeping the costs manageable. Certainly in eDiscovery, we're seeing all sorts of different types of data types these days. It's not just email and office files anymore. It's everything under the sun. It's mobile device data, it's collaboration app data, and so forth. So being able to leverage AI to manage the different types definitely is key. And so it's important to know, just how a tool adapts to changing data sources and formats. So compliance from a standpoint of, one of the things that eDiscovery professionals have to deal with these days are, being compliant with data privacy standards and legal standards. So, we have to be GDPR compliant, CCPA compliant, and things of that nature. AI can assist with that. It can help ensure defensibility and compliance with those standards, and in reduction and reducing that legal exposure in terms of potentially reducing the chance of getting hit with regulatory fines can add to the ROI. And another key one, perhaps one of the most important key benefits or cost considerations is competitive advantage. Hey, are you doing it better and faster than somebody else? With AI, faster case assessment, predictive analytics can improve your legal strategy. Might put you ahead of your opponent in the case, and the insights you get through AI could lead to better negotiation outcomes. So all things to consider when evaluating ROI. So it's important to keep that in mind. So let's with that in mind and all those considerations to think about, what are some of the best practices for getting started with GenAI in your eDiscovery projects? We'll walk through those here. So the thing you obviously want to do is define clear objectives. What are you looking the AI to accomplish? And that involves identifying specific pain points that AI should address. We're spending way too much on document review. We're not as accurate as we could be in identifying privileged information. We're struggling to identify personally identifiable information. Whatever the case is, you want to know what you're trying to accomplish before you get started. So you want to align your adoption of AI with those business and legal goals. That's cost reduction or efficiency, compliance. You need to define those clear objectives up front. And you've got to identify potential use cases. You've got to be able to consider the things that you're going to be doing with AI, and and just how the tools will be applied. And one of the things that hopefully you're getting out of this presentation is that it can be applied to a lot of different use cases. So keep that in mind, because that's important to consider as you are going down that process. Generative AI, I think we've only begun to scratch the surface on just all it can be used for. So be prepared to think outside the box in terms of what you can do with it, And hopefully the screenshots you saw of the Lexby platform earlier in this presentation illustrated some potential use cases you might not have thought of. Okay. Another one is, selecting the right solution. You've got to look at, the capabilities. You got to look at what are the costs, the support, how long have the capabilities been contained within the product? What are the clients saying, that who are using the solution in terms of the capabilities, in terms of the costs, in terms of the support, and what have you. You've got to really consider, and define what the right solution is for your organization before you go out and apply. And you've got to make sure that that solution ensures data security and compliance. So data privacy standards, making sure that the security security of the platform helps promote data privacy standards or compliance with data privacy standards like GDPR and CCPA and HIPAA if you're dealing with medical health data and what have you. You also want to understand what certifications a platform has. And of course, you want to apply the ability for, within the platform for things like role-based access controls. So, you may have administrators who have certain rights. You may have other users that may have specific rights. And that's an important way of ensuring data security. One of the things that I think is always a good idea is start with a pilot. You can run AI on a small data set before you get to full implementation, or you can use it. Maybe you can apply it to a case you've already worked on and see how using AI would have maybe benefited that case. The key is to compare the AI results against traditional review methods for accuracy and efficiency. And then you want to continue to gather feedback from the legal teams to keep refining those workflows. And all the time you want to be training and fine-tuning the AI, to at least to some extent leverage human reviewers to validate AI predictions and improve accuracy. There's still a level of human in the loop, even as you leverage AI. You want to kind of continue to do things like building up your list of prompts and fine tune those prompts to get better responses, more targeted responses out of your AI model. And basically, you want to monitor and validate those AI outputs. You've got to regularly audit the AI-assisted review decisions to ensure defensibility. One of the things that you want to do is kind of set confidence thresholds, and generative AI will set a confidence level that it applies to documents. So you want to set confidence thresholds for AI-generated classifications to minimize false positives and negatives. And you want to use benchmarking metrics, of course, recall and precision to track the performance. And one of the things that I think we're finding is people are doing that and finding that the recall and precision is quite high when they've used generative AI in review. And then you want to optimize workflows for AI integration. So, automate repetitive tasks like document classification or privilege logs or redactions, at least to the extent you can. You can do things like standardized metadata tagging for, better AI-driven organization, and apply to things like early case assessment. You can certainly have some optimized workflows at the beginning of the case as well as well into the case to really identify key documents quickly. Change management, user adoption. You've got to educate your legal teams on how AI augments but doesn't replace human expertise. There's still a need for human in the loop. Hands-on training, no matter how intuitive the platform is, needs to be provided so that the users can really understand it and use and be able to be trained with real-world use case examples. And then, encourage collaboration between the legal and technical teams to ensure that the the integration into the platform is smooth. And then finally, you've got to continue to evaluate the ROI, adjust the strategy, track the time savings, the cost reduction, the accuracy improvements over time. If you start to compare AI-assisted versus traditional eDiscovery costs to measure return on investment, hopefully you're going to see that ROI continue to build. And then you continue to adjust your models and your workflows based on evolving case requirements and regulations. And you're going to continue to see everything changing over time. The technology will change and improve. The data types you're working with will change. Regulations will change. So obviously, there's no such thing as having a static workflow these days and just continuing to work with it. You've got to continuously adjust based on the landscape that you're dealing with. So hopefully this discussion's been helpful to you, and the resources will be as well once you all see the slides. And with that, I'll say thanks to all of you for attending, and I'll turn it back over to Jeff to close this out.
Thanks so much, Doug. Incredible insights. Now let's bring some of those concepts to life with practical examples of how legal teams are already using Lexbee's GenAI features and industry-leading speed. Jordan Howlett, a high-powered litigator, runs a multi-office boutique firm and typically goes up against larger, deep-pocketed opponents. With Lexbee Copilot, Jordan leverages the capability to instantly synthesize key facts, arguments, and risks in real time. David Jones was concerned he'd be outgunned by an AmLaw powerhouse. Lexbee was his equalizer and helped deliver a winning verdict. Paige Tackett at Thompson Co. had incredibly tight deadlines. Lexbee's blazing speed helped her move from document ingestion to productions in record time. So let's wrap up with one last poll. Would you like a quick 10-minute demonstration of the Lexbee eDiscovery platform, including the Lexbee GenAI Copilot? And while you're answering that, on behalf of Lexbee and our guest speaker, Doug Austin, thank you for joining us. This session will be available as a streaming video, a downloadable PDF presentation, and an MP3 podcast. To stay in the loop on upcoming sessions, email us at webinars@lexbee.com or follow us on LinkedIn. And please take a moment to complete the brief survey at the end of today's session. It helps us improve the series and better serve your needs. We'll see you next time for more best practices in eDiscovery, GenAI, and digital forensics. Until then, take care.